Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Little disclaimer, there are many ways to center. This is just how I do it, and it works really well for me, so this is what I teach everyone. Now, if this is your first time centering clay on the wheel, it might feel a little tricky because the key here is you need to do all 3 of these steps at the same time. But don't worry, because I want you to just focus on each step individually at a time, and they're going to build on each other so that eventually it just becomes muscle memory and you don't have to think about it anymore. The clay will just magically become centered. This is the goal. So here is 500 grams of clay. This is a great starter amount of clay. It's this many pounds, and this is like a cup, mug, something manageable for a first project. Step number 1 has all to do with water. From this point on, all the way till the end of throwing, actually, not just centering. From this point on, all the way till the end of throwing, I want your clay to have a nice, slick coating of water on it at all times, okay? And that doesn't just mean adding water at the beginning, because during this whole process, your hands are going to be absorbing water, the clay is definitely going to be absorbing water, and water is going to be splashing into your splash pan. So you do need to consistently add water throughout the process of your centering, especially during centering, but also during the rest of your throwing. If at any point you are feeling some sort of friction, that just means you're not using enough water, and just squeeze out a little bit more clay. Now I'm going to say something that I know I'm going to get comments about. I'm going to say that if you are an absolute beginner, at this point there's no such thing as too much water. Now I know at a certain point, there is going to be such thing as too much water, and your pots are going to flop over way easier, for sure. But what I've experienced in the probably thousands of students that have had come through my throwing classes is that mostly people use too little water. So when in doubt, err on the side of more water if you're a beginner, and then later on, as you get a little bit more advanced, we can start talking about reducing that water. So that's step number 1. You want to hold the sponge in your right hand and always just have it available to squeeze out water during the centering process. Now, if you are left-handed, you're going to be doing everything opposite of me. So I'm a right-handed person. My wheel is going to be spinning counterclockwise, and I'm going to be holding the sponge in my right hand. If you are left-handed, everything should be reversed. So the next step, we're going to be talking about my left hand. If you're left-handed, that's going to be your right hand, okay? So everything's going to be mirrored if you're left-handed. Before we get into our next tip, let's take a little break to talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace. If you've never heard about Squarespace before, they are an all-in-one website platform that artists and entrepreneurs use to stand out online. I've personally been using Squarespace ever since I started my business, and I'm still using them for my website today. There are a few things that I love about Squarespace, one of which is their online store, where you can sell pretty much anything. Physical goods, online classes, services, and even memberships. 2, they just launched a really cool feature called Squarespace Blueprint that makes setting up your website, tailoring your brand, and optimizing for SEO even easier. And 3, once you have your online store set up, Squarespace offers really flexible payment options for your customers. So they can have a seamless ordering experience using PayPal, credit card, Apple Pay, or even Afterpay. So if you're looking to take selling your pottery to the next level, or you're just looking for an online home for your art, I really recommend Squarespace because they will make your brand look beautiful really easily. So head to squarespace.com right now for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/potterytothepeople for 10% off your very first website or domain. Now let's get back to the video. Step number 2 is our left hand. We are going to be pushing inward with our left hand. So the left hand is going to be all the inward pressure that you are applying. So the first thing that you need to focus on is that your elbow, there needs to be a straight line from your elbow to the bottom part of your hand into the very center of the clay. So if you have your hand up a little higher, like this for example, the line from your elbow to your hand is gonna shoot off and it's not going to be in the center of the clay. Likewise, if your hand is too low, the line is gonna go and it's not gonna hit your clay. And you're probably going to have wrist problems. So you want to have that straight line into the center of your clay. This is the correct position for your left hand. The part of your hand that we actually want to be pushing with is this bottom part of your hand, the part of your hand that is within that line, because this is going to be great pressure and give you enough strength to actually push in the clay. Now, a very key important part of this is that you're going to be anchoring your elbow with something, okay? So I anchor just below my knee here. It doesn't matter, you could anchor, with your body. I've seen some people do that, lower, higher, whatever. Some people even use the splash pan. You need something behind your elbow to be pushing forward, because we're not going to be pushing with our bicep here. We're not pushing with our arms, and definitely not with our shoulders. We are pushing with this leg muscle right here. And if you develop that technique, no matter what size of clay you have, within limitations, your leg muscles are going to be stronger than that. So that's going to give you the most strength, the easiest way to center, and the easiest on your body, because we don't want to be leaving here today with hurting backs and sore limbs. And then the last thing about the inward pressure is that you want to be making sure that your hand is holding it straight. So it should be exactly perpendicular to the wheel head right here. This part that we're pushing, it's going to make like a right angle straight in. So just to recap, we're pushing straight in line to the center of the clay. We're pushing with this bottom kind of fleshy part of our hand, and it's going to be straight inward, like this. Okay? This is step number 2. Now take a deep breath. I know it's a lot of information at first. Hopefully you're not a beginner. Hopefully you know some of these steps already, and it's helping you a lot. That's my goal here. Okay, step number 3 is going to be our right hand. So our right hand is going to be doing double duty. It's not only going to be holding our sponge during this entire time, but it is also going to be our downward pressure. So where we are going to be pushing with our right hand is just this part of our hand. This kind of fleshy part of our hand, just on the edge here, this is where we're going to be pushing down into the clay. So the knuckle right here where your finger becomes your hand, this part right here, that is going to be actually right in the center of the clay, right here, okay? So if you notice, you're actually just working on this bottom half of the clay, or this bottom section of the clay at a time. That's totally fine, because the wheel is spinning and it's all gonna come around. So it really helps to just work on one side, and it's going to help with your form and everything. Just want to work on that bottom half. And then your hands want to relate to each other, okay? We want to kind of lock them in together so that they can support each other, because if they're loose, they're just less strong. Everything about centering is just about supporting the different parts of your body to have that strength. So I like to tuck them in sort of like this. So I'm holding the sponge. Can you see, like, my fingers are in this part, yeah? The more important part, though, is that this part, as we spoke about already, is at a right angle, whereas this part is going to be parallel to the wheel, okay? So it's basically making a square shape with the wheel head, straight line, square shape. And when you do all this together, you make this shape of centered piece. So this is what's called being centered, okay? So this is that downward pressure that's making this part flat. That's this inward pressure that's making this part flat. And that's how you center it. So you know it's centered when you just hold your finger on here and you can like close your eyes and you feel like the clay's not even moving. This is how you know it's completely centered. Now, I know that took me just a few moments to center it because I've been doing this a long time. It's gonna take longer for you if you're a beginner. Just give yourself some time with it. You know, I would say give yourself up to a minute before moving on to the next step if you feel like you're not able to get it centered right away. Just take some time with it. The worst thing that you can do, I see a lot of people do this, is they hold it and then they stop and they like wanna check it. They hold it and then they stop. I know that this takes a little bit of time to get the feeling for, but you should be able to feel when it's centered. You don't need to stop the wheel and look at it and look for the shape. I know that's gonna take a little bit of time at first, so if you need to stop, but just make sure you're not holding it for a grand total of 2 seconds and expecting that to be enough time for the clay to center. It takes me longer than 2 seconds, okay? So just hold it there and give yourself like a good 10-second push before you have that urge to pause it, assess, you know, ask your teacher, whatever. Okay, so those are my 3 steps, but I've got a few extra tips for you. Tip number 1, you need to use speed. So I don't know if you noted the speed that I was using to center, but this is about the speed that I usually center at. During this step of throwing, speed is your friend. Later on, when you're doing your pulling and whatnot, like it could get a little too fast, but during this point, it's like, again, err on the side of too fast because you can't really go too fast with centering. Don't worry that your clay is going to like fly off or something, because hopefully it's been well attached to the wheel head. Like a lot of folks are intimidated with the wheel at first and they'll try and center at something like this speed. It's really not fast enough. It's just gonna be a lot harder. It is possible, but it is gonna be a lot harder rather if you use like a higher setting of speed. So that's my first extra tip. My second extra tip is oscillating. So this is sort of like coning. I'm gonna show you first and then I'm gonna explain it. So oscillating is like when it goes up and then you bring it down. Up and down. And one more. Okay, so when I have a student who's really struggling to center a piece, I'll give them this as a trial. It might work for you, it doesn't work for everyone, but it's something that you could try. So basically what I'm doing is I'm increasing the inward pressure and simultaneously decreasing the downward pressure. So I'm pushing more with my left hand and I am still pushing with my right hand, but I'm pushing a lot less. And what that allows me to do is it brings the clay up. And then I'll switch it. I'll push more with my right hand and I'll push less with my left hand and then it will go flat, okay? So I find that this really helps sometimes to just kind of wiggle it into position. Might work for you, it might not, but it is something that you can try if you're struggling to center. And this is sort of like mini coning. Coning does basically the same exact thing. For beginners, I don't recommend that they bother with coning because it's not that important. But again, if you're having trouble, you can do this oscillating thing. Okay, another tip that I have for you is just keep in mind that the clay will go where your hands are not. And likewise, the clay will go away from your hand. So if you're having something weird going on, like sometimes people get like a mushroom. So when you're trying to center, common thing is to get like a mushroom shape, or even more dramatic, go something like this. Right? Something like that, where it's very much inward. We want the straight lines here, right? So what you're probably doing in this case is you're not keeping this straight and this part of your hand is like getting sucked under, right? So you're pushing with this part of your hand, whereas you should be pushing with this part of your hand all equally to make that perfect 90-degree angle. So we want nice straight lines here on the outside. Something else that I see people do is, I call it punching the clay. So basically you have your hand at the wrong angle. Instead of keeping this part of your clay flat, you're kind of punching into the clay, you're pushing into the clay, and then you get this little crater here, which is not what we want. We want a flat top. So just instead of punching, change your hand so that it's more flat. This part of your hand that you're actually pushing with is more flat, and then you get a flat top. So if you're having the clay go weird places, just think about, like, if the clay is going outward, the top, the bottom, wherever, you need to block it. You need to cover that area somehow with your hand so that it's not going out, that it stays under control and in that perfect puck shape. So if you have the right technique, you really shouldn't have to push that hard. Like, this is not a strength game. When it comes to these smaller sizes, yeah, when you're getting into more kilos, of course strength does help. But for small pieces of clay, it's really just about technique. You are strong enough. Trust me, I'm a 5'2" tiny little person and I can push around the clay as well. So just lean in, use your whole body, kind of exhale into the clay, and if everything's lined up, it will just get centered. Now, I don't cover a lot of these like practical throwing tips on YouTube, but I did used to teach pottery classes for a living for like many years. And just before leaving Berlin, I distilled all that information into an online wheel throwing class. Now, this self-paced video class is chock full of the most useful information that helped my students over the years. So if you're interested in learning more steps to how I throw on the wheel, I'll have that class linked for you down below. Bonus points, you get to see my old Berlin studio. So that's it for me today. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, friends.